we, in the middle upper class in South Vietnam, to get ahead, we had to try to be as French as possible. We adopt the post custom, of course, try to learn French very well and so on. So I was sent to a French school because that's the best school in Saigon.
And if I remember correctly, the Ho Chi Minh actually was working in Paris, and then he basically came back to Vietnam, obviously settled in the north, and then that's where they kind of started to actively resist against the French. Is that right?
It doesn't start by Ho Chi Minh. He was one of the things, but there are some people in the South, few, who also wish to be independent from France, but you can't do anything because the police would, if you start a movement, something, right, you will end up in prison fast. So that Ho Chi Minh came to known later on in my childhood. But forget, Ho Chi Minh was in New York. He lived in Harlem.
Really?
Yeah, he knows America before he went to France and Russia and so on. So he tried to find a place to get independence, whatever he could. But we, at the time when I grew up, I didn't hear about Ho Chi Minh until much later. Yeah. That's because with the South is not allowed to talk independence,
That's amazing.
You have to be grateful to have the French colonial.
And did all of your family live in the South, or did you actually have family in the North as well?
Yeah, we're in the South, and a little bit like in United States, but not as strong. We don't want Northerners.
Can I just back up to a couple of things, Mom? So, because this was really interesting for me, Brian, this stuff about Ho Chi Minh first trying to get support from the US, right? I mean, I just want that to be clear, because that was news to me in my later adult life, that he first asked the US for support, and when we refused to give it, would not support this country trying to gain independence from the colonizer,
right?
Ironic for me, they turned to a communist country that could arm them and would support them to get independence from the oppressor, or whatever the colonizer. And that to me was a big revelation.
Yeah, and I remember learning about that as well when we were over there. And that was, he went to the UN trying to plead his case, and obviously now you're starting to get into the great chess game, which is the global politics. But yeah, I mean, America, are they going to go against their French ally, or so and so when you look at it that way, the guy Ho Chi Minh really had no other choice, and it's fascinating. And this is actually very interesting, Dao. I interviewed about maybe 5 episodes ago a gentleman named Joe Connell, who's an author, and he writes a lot about kind of Irish history within the last 100 years, from their War of Independence in 1916 through 1921, and kind of all the way through. And it's fascinating because we see one of the things that people talk about is, and I think even Ho Chi Minh at one point had mentioned this, that they sort of modeled what they were doing in Vietnam after what the Irish tried to do with the English in the in the 1960s and early 1920s. So because he was over in Europe at that time, and so he's seeing all this kind of take place. And so once he was kind of out on his own, nobody seemed to want to help him. So there's a fascinating parallel there about that.
But Ho Chi Minh also, we call them Uncle Ho.
Yeah,
he was not a communist society. He wanted independence from France. So the communism come much later because he had no collaboration, the French still in Vietnam. And he tried to get other people help, other European, but nobody helped. So he went to Russia and China.
Yep.
So that's the way that independence and communism is one way for him to get help.
Right.
And so, but we still call him Uncle Ho,
Yeah.
you know, is not a terrible bad guy. The people around him really bad.
Yeah,
And, but
exactly.
he's just,
Exactly. And that's the one thing that I've definitely learned as an adult, especially um, with all the military kind of history I've been taught and I've read, is you know, one man's freedom fighter is the other one's terrorist, and you can say that across the board with anybody. Just happens to be which side you're on. You know.
Right. No, this is something I think, Mom, I just want to bring this out. I'm not sure, Brian, when you'd get to it, but this I think was something that's really unusual about Mom, is that she, you know, you grew up under the threat of the communist guerrillas, right? That they were in the jungle, threatening your family, killing family members. You were watching bodies going down the river tied together, and like needing to, you know, strap money belts on at night for fear that the communists were going to come out of the jungle and like raid the house and all that stuff. And yet, decades later, in spite of all that fear about the communists, you were really instrumental in helping to repair the relations, because you recognized them as freedom fighters. Even though you were one of the threatened families, you recognized them as freedom fighters, and then wanted to support them, right? Wanted to, you know, support your people, even though they were under that regime. You might not have agreed with the regime, but you understood why they did that.
Yeah, and that's
yeah, we, you know, we in the South, during World War II, the Japanese invade Vietnam, took over the French, expelled the French. And so then when the Japanese lost, the French came back. But they have difficulty, and the independence movement gets stronger. There have become more parties, political parties, to try to follow Ho Chi Minh and others who want the independence from Vietnam. So it is complicated, and Ho Chi Minh could not, you know, he need to have more friends, and being a little guy in a small country.
Yeah.
And the French are
sandwiched
big guys,
being sandwiched between the big guys. Yeah.
in his search for other. But my family was victim of the Vietnamese communists, because my grandfather was a well-respected person in the province, and the French gave him an honorary title to take care of his number of community, because he was a good man.
Yeah. So your grandfather was he high up in the French?
In this little town where we live, on the branch of the Mekong River, and he was very well respected. But at the time when the French came back, and there were different Vietnamese political party to vie to to take care of the French, you know, to fight the French.
Right.
And so the communists become dominant. They try to eliminate other parties. So they would try to eliminate all the leaders in communities. And my grandfather was one of the people that was a victim. And they kidnapped him and drowned him in a rice field.